Hi, we're going to go over a chapter today in Amy Erdman Farrell's Fat Shame, Stigma, and the Fat Body in American Culture, which is from 2011. We'll be discussing in particular Feminism, Citizenship, and Fat Stigma, Chapter 4, which is pages 82 to 116. I usually like to start off this particular reading thinking about how feminism is used in this chapter. So feminism, citizenship, and fat stigma. So we're talking about feminism gets used for a whole bunch of things. People can say, I identify as a feminist, I'm taking a feminist perspective, I'm using feminist analytical tools. In this case, I think what we're getting is a discussion of feminism primarily as a historical force and how that historical force, because it focuses on first wave feminism, and how that historical force was also a social movement. So it's something that we can think about, that people organized together, and whether or not those two features influence potentially a political theory that's coming out of it. So whether that political theory is of what does resistance look like, what are feminist goals, what are ideal forms of resistance, and so on. So what we're looking for is a connection between historical force and political theory through this work, I think. One of the important theoretical tools coming out of feminist analysis is to identify how groups that are subject to oppression are also subject to binary or dualistic thinking. So these binaries are tools of oppression. They are applied to groups who are oppressed and marginalized. So three important features of a binary. It's treated as oppositional, it's treated as mutually exclusive, so you can't be both, and it's hierarchical. So the two things are oppositionally defined. If you're this, you're not that. We, in feminist theory, talk a lot about gender binary or gender dualism and critique that. When I usually teach this course, this particular reading, I think about how fat people are subject to certain kinds of dichotomous thinking, and so we would brainstorm things along these lines in order to think about stigma. So one would be about intelligent and unintelligent, disordered or orderly, careless or careful, out of control, in control, successful, unsuccessful. You can sort of pause here and think about all of the different sort of dominant, stereotypical, stigmatizing binaries that fat people are subject to. Healthy and unhealthy, poor and rich, potentially, different class backgrounds. So anyway, it's just important to pause to think about that at the outset, because we're going to think about how specifically stigma is used within this particular feminist moment in order to say this kind of body, this kind of person, this kind of political subject is failed. They're failed in their way of being a body, and so they cannot be a political subject. So what is stigma? Well, Amy Farrell draws on Erving Goffman's definition, this idea of a body or a way of being that communicates some kind of failure. And it communicates failure so strongly that it breaks down possibilities for that person. So it can be attached to your identity, your body, your character, your group membership, and it really manages in and out sort of groups within society. So one form of stigmatized identity at the time that Amy Farrell is writing is just to be a suffragist, to be working for suffrage. So you have here a kind of, these are failed women, right? They're unattractive, they have big teeth, you know, they're complaining, they're old maids, they're anti-man, right? They're potentially violent, they're attacking, you know, police officers, they're unruly, disorderly, upsetting the social structure. They're also upsetting the home, right? So they're, you know, browbeating and you know, physically threatening the husband here. You also have failure to be a proper mother. The baby is crying because mommy is a suffragette, or women are using their sexuality. And really it's just this painting this picture of suffrage, so feminists at the time, as bitter, angry, and really ugly, and potentially sexually disordered, gender disorder people, basically. And what Farrell does is reads Fat Stigma into this particular cultural moment. So I shouldn't say reads, and takes that lens. So is looking for how the body operates in this sort of positioning of stigma for a group trying to find access to political rights. Okay, and the way she discusses it is, you have she's reading these postcards and propaganda pieces that they demonstrate competing representations of the body. So what I've shown you thus far is anti-suffrage, demonstrated that women who are feminists are not proper women. So in this place of theorizing the body, what we see is that how the body is represented tells us where the political subject falls within social hierarchies. So whether those hierarchies are race, class, gender, sexuality, those are all sort of connected into a particular historical moment around eugenics. So what we're looking for is political subjects who are going to advance the cause of the nation, which is overlapping and mutually reinforcing with this idea of race betterment, race improvement, right? And it's important to note here that racial betterment is leveraged by suffrage as well as anti-suffrage, right? The ones that I was showing you before, those women are upsetting a gender hierarchy. Here, what you have is a pro-suffrage political cartoon that demonstrates a woman's body, a suffrage-seeking woman's body, as slender, delicate, white, ordered, attractive, with high levels of sexual differentiation. That's the other thing about race betterment, is that the higher on the hierarchy of racial betterment at the time, the more distinct the genders will be. So you're going to have stark contrasts between traits, really enforcing that mutual exclusivity. So here what you have is actually a fat man looking quite menacing at the thin, slender, good woman, who definitely reassures the viewer that, hey, if I get the vote, I will not be upsetting gender hierarchies. I will still be a woman, I will still be attractive and slender and quite differentiated from men. Now you have this fat man in the background leering, basically menacingly saying, I'm holding back progress. And my fat is a representation of that. Right? And maybe that holding back of progress is a fat cat or a person who has a lot of money, but still their body is a representation of holding back the good, slender woman who's going to be on board with the nation's progress. Here's another example of a pro-suffrage representation of women as thin, delicate, beautiful, admired by men. You have men in the background. And let's just look for a second at an anti-suffrage piece that specifically uses the body. So here you have a very strong, a larger, very masculinized picture of a person seeking suffrage, a woman, let's say. And, you know, they're set in a sort of political place, Speaker of the House, judge, and they're using a rolling pin and a spoon, definitely to show that it would be silly to transfer any kind of expertise one has in the domestic sphere to the public sphere. Of course, these are treated as binary opposites as well. But in this case, the masculinization of this woman and making her larger is really about saying, this is an evolutionary backslide. If you allow this person to vote, society will be going downhill, backwards. The evolutionary term here is atavistic. We'll be going back in time and undo progress. So in terms of fat holding back progress, that is actually also racially aligned as a racial failure for white women to want to have power over men or power equal to men. And so when they demonstrate that, they are then representing a racialized backslide. So here we have a political cartoon that is trying to evoke, I think, blackface. The name on there is making fun of particular names. And so Amy Farrell makes the argument that this cartoon, with a bigger body, with certain kinds of racializing features, let's say, stereotypically, are trying to say, if you give women the vote, you're basically letting black women into the political sphere, and that will upend everything. And so, importantly, and what I think is really valuable about Farrell's work is she talks about how holding back progress is happening on both sides when fat stigma is used. So here you have the anti-suffrage league, and you have old, sour-faced, fat women with a fat dog. You know, they're sleepy, they're drowsy, their eyes are closed. You know, they're not aware, they're not attractive, and they're basically saying, you know, these young women who want the vote, they're wrong, right? And so we're basically saying, in this case, that the fat, stigmatized person holding back the racial hierarchy are against suffrage, demonstrating that kind of flexibility that the fat body can represent one's place within complicated hierarchies in various ways.